I think we really need to try and feel the emotion in the room. Can you imagine the shock and the confusion after 3 years of being with Jesus, everything you just went through on the triumphal entry? The mood in the room had to have just dropped out completely on these guys. They have a traitor among them. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do, do quickly." Jesus is in total control of this situation. That speaks of our sovereign King. I was a firefighter for many years out in California, and when I was young, my main goal was to become a fire captain. And to be able to become a fire captain, not only does it take years of experience, but it takes a lot of training to go along with that, a lot of college classes and stuff. And so in those classes, there was a lot of classes meant to teach you how to manage groups of people. And in those classes, you learn a lot of different theories about management. I even learned about light bulbs and how changing light bulbs in an office can actually be more beneficial sometimes than pay raises. There was a lot of different theories out there. One of the theories, though, that they kept coming back to was by this fellow named Abraham Maslow. And Abraham Maslow, he was kind of an interesting guy. He was born of Russian and Jewish descent, and his family had immigrated to America to avoid czarist persecution of the Jews in Russia. Now, they settled in New York, and they were a poor family, and Maslow actually, according to him, had 0 friends. The only person he had to hang out with was his cousin. So, kind of had a difficult time there, and then to make matters worse on him, his mom was not the nicest person. I think the nicest thing I can say about what he said about his mom is that she was a horrible narcissist. And so it was a rough childhood for Abraham Maslow as he was growing up. Well, when he got older, he was going to put himself through college, and he kind of flunked out of a couple different colleges, ended up in Wisconsin to finally get his master's degree in psychology. And he is cited as being the founder of what they call humanistic psychology today. And in 1943, Maslow published his papers and his findings, and in it was called Hierarchy of Needs. It's now called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs in the Teaching and Management courses. And in this publication, Maslow theorized that humans had to achieve 5 things to be successful and to succeed. And those 5 things are physiological needs, the need of security, the need for love and belonging, the need for esteem, and then the tip of the pyramid, literally because it's a pyramid in the pictures, is self-actualization. And self-actualization is the process of realizing one's full potential and becoming the very best version of yourself. Sounds kind of familiar. This is way back in 1943, but kind of sounds like today's culture that we're living in today. Well, as I was training to be a leader, this theory was frequently taught to help us understand how to motivate personnel. And I was taught to meet these theorized needs in order to motivate the crews to perform extraordinary tasks in our job. And the class basically teaches leaders how these humanistic needs are met so that we can foster teamwork and a sense of belonging and helping people along to reach their goals and their full potential. Now, I was a captain for 13 years, and I honestly can not think of a time when I actually used any of these theories to motivate my personnel. It's just not what I did. I cared for them, I made sure they had what they need, but their self-esteem while fighting fire really had no bearing on getting the job done. But Maslow's idea was that everything was found within you. Basically, if there was difficulty in your life, if you are not at peace, it is because one of your needs aren't being met. You're not meeting your needs. And the focus is entirely on the individual and their self-actualization. Now, according to Maslow, the way to find peace is to realize your full potential and live it out, whatever that looks like to you as an individual. but to us, that's really not reality. Today, we're going to go into our next I am statement, but we have to do a bit of work to get there today. We need to kind of set the stage, I think, to truly grasp the impact of what this I am statement is talking about. So as we know, Jesus had handpicked his 12 men that he was going to spend the next 3 years with. And because being a sovereign king, all he had to say was, "Follow me." And these men got up and they followed, right? Now, Jesus started off his ministry with changing water into wine. And from there, the roller coaster just basically takes off, right, for these guys. So you need to put yourself in their shoes, right? We talk about using our senses and trying to put ourselves in that first century Jew mindset. So these were the Jews that he had picked, the 12 disciples that he had picked. These are just average Jews living an average life until Jesus comes along. And then they start to hear and see things that these men they can't explain. It's teachings different than they've ever been taught before. Like the time that Jesus healed the Roman centurion's servant. Jesus didn't have to go to the bed. He didn't have to go to the house. Because of the Roman centurion's faith, Jesus healed his servant right on sight. Pretty amazing. Or about the time when the disciples and Jesus are in the boat heading to Capernaum, and the storm hits, and the water's crashing over the bow of the boat. Jesus is asleep on a pillow in the back of the boat. And his disciples go and they frantically wake him up. And they said, "Lord, do you not care that we are going to perish?" They are in a panic. They think that they're going to die. Jesus gets up and with 3 words, "Peace, be still," he commanded the seas to stop. And the waters were calm. Or how about the time that Jesus gets word that his beloved friend Lazarus is ill? And he waits. And I can't imagine the waiting part, because if it's one thing that drives me absolutely crazy is inaction, especially when I know that there is something to do or something that should be done. It is just one of the things I probably dislike the most in this world is waiting. So Jesus waits, and after 2 days, they begin the journey back to Judea, where Lazarus is. Now, by the time they reach Judea, or the area where Lazarus is inside of Judea, Lazarus is already dead and in the tomb. And it looks like all hope is lost for him. But not with Jesus. Jesus resurrects Lazarus. He brings him back from the dead. Kind of a coincidence? I don't know. But again, 3 words. Lazarus, come out. And he commands him to live. And Lazarus comes back to life in front of his disciples. And then there was the time that Jesus boldly heals the man with the withered hand in the synagogue on the Sabbath. As the Pharisees and the scribes are watching, they're watching and they're waiting for him to do anything that they can get him on. Now imagine that boldness. The man that you're following is essentially defying the leaders of the day. And he's doing it with full power, full sovereignty. On top of all these miracles and healings, the disciples, they had special inner circle training with Jesus in his teachings. And he frequently gave them special explanations to teach them about the hidden messages in his parables. As time grew closer to the Passion, Jesus also continued to explain to them about his coming death. But they couldn't comprehend it. He was the Messiah. He was here to rescue the Jews as far as they can see. So how is he going to do that if he leaves? And for 3 years, the disciples went through a lot of highs and lows with Jesus. And it just must have been such an incredible journey when you really think about it, what these men went through. Well, after walking through this amazing ministry with Jesus, the disciples enter into Jerusalem with him on what we now call Palm Sunday. And Jesus rides in on the back of a colt of a donkey, which is prophesied. And the people line the streets, laying down cloaks and palm fronds in front of him. Now, this was a special practice that was only reserved for conquering kings and emperors as they came back to their homelands from war. So as the disciples entered with him, all this pomp and circumstance, they had to have been thinking that Jesus was being treated like a king. They were shouting praises to him. To be in that procession, literally, just the adrenaline that these men were going through, that kind of rock star status that these guys had to be feeling by being with Jesus, like this is the culmination, the peak. It's all coming together now. So they are on an amazing high right now, hanging out with Jesus. Now, over the next several days in Jerusalem, things continue mostly to go well for Jesus and his disciples. Soon after the triumphal entry, Jesus goes to the temple and he overturns the tables of the money changers. He drives them out of the temple. For days, the Pharisees and the scribes were continuing to put pressure on Jesus' teachings, trying to find any fault in him, and they failed. But Jesus continues to have the support of the people. They came out daily to hear his teachings. The people are still with him. Well, now it's Thursday, and the disciples are with Jesus in the upper room, probably feeling pretty good about what they're doing. It's been a pretty good week. And on top of that amazing time with Jesus, but with that amazing time with Jesus, the mood is about to change. And it starts to change in John 13. If you could turn to John 13 for me. We're going to look back a little bit. Verses 21 to 30. This is where we're going to kind of see the mood change happening. And it says, after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at the table by Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do, do quickly." Now no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. One thing that really jumped out at me when I was preparing the sermon, I read this, I don't know how many times, but it just kind of shows you, to me, the type A personality of Peter in 24. So Simon Peter motioned to him. All Peter had to do was kind of like give this guy a nod, and he asked Jesus the question that everybody was thinking. I don't know, it just kind of jumps out at me for some reason. Okay, so with all that said, with all that's going on, I think we really need to try and feel the emotion in the room. I mean, can you imagine the shock and the confusion after 3 years of being with Jesus and everything you just went through on the triumphal entry, the confusion and the pain that these men must have been feeling. The mood in the room had to have just dropped out completely on these guys. They have a traitor among them. They don't know what to make of it. Jesus just told them that Judas was the traitor. They are so taken aback that in verse 29, some of them think that Judas is going to go out and he's telling them to go buy groceries. This is what they're saying, right? I just think it's because they're so confused about what's happening. But one thing we cannot look past in this whole verse is Jesus commanding Satan to go do a thing. And in verse 27, then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to him, what you are going to do, do quickly. Now, obviously, the disciples do not see Satan entering into Judas. Jesus knows this because this is Jesus' plan. And Jesus is in total control of this situation. Jesus commands Satan to go do this thing and to just do it quickly. That speaks of our sovereign King, I think, greatly. So we don't want to look past these things in these texts. We need to read very carefully. Okay, so that was the first mood changer. There is a traitor in the midst. Now Jesus lets them know that he is leaving. And where he is going, they cannot follow. So let's look at John 13:33, where it says, little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. This had to have been an absolute shock to these men. They've been with him for everything for 3 years. They just rode in, like I said, as a conquering king. And in the mindset of the first century Jew, Jesus should be arming his people right now if he is the conquering king. He should be freeing the Israelites. The Romans should literally be slaughtered in the streets right now because Jesus is the Messiah. That is what their mindset is. So to hear this, that he's leaving and they cannot go, had to have just been absolutely crushing to these men. So again, we're looking at probably a lot of confusion. The amount of feelings that had to be running through them is probably off the charts. Their whole world is turning upside down. These guys have given up everything to follow Jesus, and he is telling them that they cannot follow. Well, Jesus still has one more grenade to throw in the room for these guys. So we're going to look at Peter's reaction here in John 13:37-38. And Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus answered in a question, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. So right in front of all the other disciples, Jesus is telling Peter that he is going to deny him. Peter, the rock, as we know him, one of the 3 men in Jesus' most trusted inner circle, is going to lie 3 times. Again, that number 3 just keeps popping up. It's kind of interesting. He's going to lie 3 times when he's asked if he knows Jesus. So Peter's so sure of himself, and you can read that where he says, why can I not follow? He's telling the disciples, you guys aren't going to be able to follow me. And Peter goes in with, why can't I follow you? He's singling himself out against everybody. So Peter's so sure of himself that he cannot imagine this thing, this possibility. And the other disciples are probably feeling the same thing. How is it that we are not going to be able to follow? And if you've ever received bad news, which I'm sure all of us have, it all just kind of seems to dump in at one time, doesn't it? And these guys are getting the worst news of their life right now. And it's coming in triple. They have 3 horrible things that they've just been revealed. Their source of comfort is probably what they feel is leaving and fleeting, and they need some good news. They need some hope. And this will bring us to verse 1 of our passage today in John 14. And Jesus tells them, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. Now we can see with all the context work that we've been looking at with the disciples that they probably really needed to hear and have some reassurance. And Jesus isn't just giving them some kind of pat on the back and telling them to deal with what he's given them. He's actually commanding them not to fear and not to have anxiety right now. They've just had an incredibly distressing evening, and Jesus knows this firsthand. He knows the feeling of emotions. So Jesus reassures them of his connection to the Father. He's basically telling them to not be afraid, even though he has just rocked their world. And what Jesus is talking about is peace. And peace is not found in our own efforts or our strength or in our circumstances. There isn't anything that we can do to find peace. It's only found in the unwavering love and assurances that we get from Jesus. Our faith and reliance in him is truly the only way to find comfort. It is the only way that our hearts cannot be troubled in the midst of what can be a terrible world. Jesus promises that we can have peace in the midst of our trying times, but it is only found in him. So now let's take a look at Jesus. He's going to double down on his compassion and comfort in verses 2 and 3. And he says, "In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am going, you may also be." So in this same conversation, Jesus just told the disciples that he's leaving them. But he's going to prepare a place for them. Now again, remember the Jewish mindset of him leaving. If he is the Christ, he is coming to conquer and free. So the thought of Jesus leaving is, again, it's crushing to these people, but he's trying to reassure them. And he just told them, I lost my place, sorry. But he just told them that he is going to prepare a place for them. And when the time is right, he will return for them, and that they will join him once again. And I'm assuming this would have been a great relief for them, the promise that they would see Jesus again, that he would come back for them. And this is all part of what we as Christians put our hope in today, that Jesus will return for his people. His people will spend eternity in his Father's house, in his presence. This should be the hope of every Christian everywhere, and we should be anxiously awaiting his arrival to take us home. This promise is better than anything we can find in the world to give us that comfort or security that we need. This promise that Jesus gave to his disciples is true comfort, true security. As Christians, we can hang on to this promise because it is given to us by the sovereign King of this universe and the giver of life. So let's keep looking. We're going to go into verse 4, where he says, "And you know the way to where I am going." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" Here, we can see that Jesus, he's assuring the disciples that they do know the way to the Father's house. But in true disciple fashion, they question Jesus. Now, I can't say that I blame them, because this must have been very confusing. How can they possibly know the way to God's house? Thomas is the one to speak up. And let's remember, Thomas is more than just doubting Thomas. We talked about this last time. Thomas is the one who was ready to head back to Judea with Jesus to heal Lazarus, where they had just left because they were threatening to stone them. And so Judas said, "Let us go die with him." He's willing to lay his life down for Jesus. So his devotion to Jesus has already been proven. But he is questioning this. Again, because of what the disciples are going through right now. but by Jesus telling them that there was a traitor among them, that he was going to leave, and that Peter would deny knowing Christ. That's a lot to absorb for these men in a short amount of time. So I think Thomas's response or questioning of Jesus is probably warranted. I think that I would probably do the same thing if I was in this house. I would probably be questioning what was happening because of my emotions. So now we're coming up onto our final, on this I am statement in verse 6, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, Jesus makes a bold statement that he is the way to the Father. Not only that, but he is the only way to the Father. The exclusivity of Christ alone, solus Christus, is one of the 5 solas that we here at Covenant Reformed, we hang on to it. We live by it. Christ alone affirms the teachings of Christ in this verse. Christ is the only way to the Father. Now, our final verse for today can really ruffle some feathers. It clearly says that Jesus is the only way to God. So when Thomas says they do not know the way, Jesus lets him know that he is the way. He didn't say that he is one way or that he is one of the ways to get to God, right? The idea of religious pluralism is clearly rooted out right here. The idea that many roads lead to God is debunked right here by Jesus himself. Jesus makes the irrefutable claim that he is the only road to God and to heaven, and without apologizing. Now, our culture today would have us believe that there are many roads that lead to God and heaven. That if you are a good person, you too can work your way into heaven. But this path that only leads to destruction, to idols of the world's making, and idols offer no promises and no assurances. So when Jesus talks of being the way, this can also symbolically mean a way of doing things. In fact, the earliest Christians were called people of the way in the book of Acts. Jesus is the only way to God, but he is also our example of the way we are to live as Christians. We are to follow his teachings, to strive for holiness, to work at our sanctification. And now I'm not saying that works will get you into heaven, but as believers, our life should have evidence that we are following Jesus. As Christians, we are not called to be part of the world. We are called to be set apart of this world. We are called to be a light to the world. And we must boldly proclaim that Jesus is the way, the only way. This is an example that Jesus has set for us. If we do not proclaim this, then we are no better than the world, offering false idols and false hope. Jesus is the way Jesus is the way, and when we proclaim it, then we offer real hope for the world that needs it. Jesus also says that he is the truth. The world would tell you that truth is not absolute. Here, Jesus clearly says that he is the truth. And Jesus is part of the Trinity that establishes that truth. If God has said something if God has said something isn't true, then it is not true. He is truth. And as sovereign king of the universe, God gets to decide what is truth, not us. Jesus cannot be separated from truth because he is truth. All knowledge is found in him, and he is not just a good teacher of the truth, but again, truth itself. And Jesus completes the I am statement with declaring himself to be the life. Now, Adam and Eve, they were created to live in the presence of God, to be able to eat of the tree of life. But because of the failure of Adam in the garden, sin and death has entered the world. Adam and Eve, and consequently us, are separated now from God. Some may think that this eviction was harsh or extreme. But think of this. If God had not forbid Adam and Eve from eating to the tree of life, if he had not removed them from the Garden of Eden, we would live perpetually in sin for all eternity. We would be separated from God for all eternity. God cannot be in the presence of sin. So by God removing Adam and Eve, our federal head, from the garden, shows his mercy. Because now that we have death in our life, we have the chance to be in the Father's presence yet again. Because in his grace, he gave us that eternal life by sending his Son to the earth. And this was always the plan, right? There's no plan B for God. There's only plan A. And so his rescue plan was to send Jesus. And Jesus is declaring that he is the life. He is the restoration for God's chosen people to bring them back to God. He is the reversal of the mutiny that is talked about in Genesis 3:15. This is the comfort that Jesus is conveying to his disciples at that dinner table. Only Jesus knows what is actually coming next, that he will be the sacrificial lamb for his people tomorrow. He knows what fate awaits him that next day. And yet he still seeks to comfort his men in this time of stress. Even though he knows later this evening, when Jesus asks them to be at his side, they are going to fall asleep. They are not going to be there to comfort Jesus in his time of need. In case Jesus wasn't clear enough, when he says that he is the way, the truth, and the life, he makes it even clearer by saying no one comes to the Father except through him. Jesus is making the exclusivity very clear in this message. No one means just that. No one will enter heaven. And if you want to reconcile with the Father, if you want to be with him forever, then you must go through Jesus. There are no other ways, despite what the world is trying to tell us. Maslow, as I mentioned in the beginning, would tell you that the key to peace and comfort would be found in yourself. Meeting your needs, finding your truth, and putting yourself as the sovereign. This is an atheistic view. So many people in our culture are living this way and it's getting them nowhere. You will never find what you need within yourself by making yourself the sovereign. Just this last weekend, all over the country, there were these No Kings protests. And the irony is that they all have a king that they are not willing to acknowledge. They have made themselves the sovereigns in their life. They deny the absolute truth of Jesus, saying that everyone determines their own truth. Yet in all their talk of religious pluralism, they do not have any peace. And you can see that lack of peace if you watch any of the videos that are out there right now. This is where following the way of Maslow in the world leads. It leads people down the wrong path, the path to destruction. Everyone is searching for the way. And if you are a Christian in this room, then you know the way. Jesus is the way. This life is full of highs and lows. The disciples, they were still going to face some very difficult times after Jesus comforted them with these words. But they held on to his promise, and we should too. That promise that he will return and bring his people to him. So the next time that you find yourself doubting or having your world rocked like these disciples, pray. Pray to the one who can truly provide comfort. Pray to the giver of life, eternal and abundant life. Do not rely on the things of this world, Do not look within yourself for answers. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Remember this promise of salvation. He has prepared a place for you, and He will come back for His people to be with Him for all eternity. So hang on to that, and do not let your hearts be troubled. Let's pray.